don't always get the curator of a traveling exhibit, but he will be here that day. So at 4:30, you can come and hear from him. The exhibit is called Spies in Space, Toys of the Cold War Era, and that's exactly what it is. Toys from the whole span of the Cold War era, and that feature things related to like the space race and espionage, and not just from the US side, but the US and Soviet side. So we're excited about it. It should be very interesting, and we're excited that you all would get a chance to come and hear from the curator himself. So that talk will be at 4:30. And then if you stay and join us, we'll do an official exhibit opening reception where we'll have some light refreshments, and you don't have to, but we'll encourage you to wear a costume that relates to the Cold War era. I have secured my costume. I will be coming as the fictional Carmen Sandiego. It'll be great. I'm so excited about this. So if nothing else, you have to come to see me dressed as Carmen Sandiego. But we'll have a lot of fun. We'll debut the exhibit. That will be the first chance to see the exhibit, and that exhibit will then be open the rest of the year, so you'll have multiple chances. But we do hope you join us, because I think that's going to be a really fun event, and I think it'll be really great to be able to speak to David Barnhill on that day. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say and all the time I'm going to take, because I want to turn it over to our speaker, Leo Lefevre, who is our neighbor. He's a librarian over at Hoyt Library, and we're so happy that you collaborate with us so much. Definitely truest sense of the word neighbor. And, you know, when Tom is stumped, he's over there talking to Leo. So, but you'll find him in the Michigan history area, the genealogy, and things of that nature. So if you ever need help with your own local research, he is a gem and a resource for our community. So we do thank you for coming and sharing with us today. All right, thanks.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Also, if anyone has any questions during the program, just raise your hand and ask it. Don't be concerned. I'm going to go off the rails at some point during this program, so join in. This is a true story. Everything, the information that I'm going to present has been taken from newspaper accounts, the court and interview transcripts, and also towards the end, I'll show you some of the interesting odds and ends from the Archives of Michigan for the Southern Michigan prison records. In 1921, Adrian Champlain is the father. He's at the far left. His second wife, and we have to keep in mind his second wife is Florence. That's their daughter, Frances, and their son, Richard. At this point, Adrian is a prosperous farmer. Frances has been disinherited because she married a man who dad and mom didn't like. Even though you'll find out later why. And Richard is a World War I hero. He was with the 77th at the Argonne Forest. He was a member of the Lost Battalion. So he'd seen some things.
Was Richard the son of the second wife?
Nope. Adrian and Florence never had children. These are from the first mother. On the evening of Monday, November 14th, 1921, in Richland Township, 3 fire departments were called to extinguish a fire at the farm of Adrian and Florence Champlain. Only the Hemlock and Merrill Village departments were able to respond and found their home fully ablaze, and there was nothing they could do. Saginaw County Undersheriff Hodges and one of his detectives, Lang, were called, and they arrived at the house when it was still burning at 11 p.m., fully engulfed yet. They found the couple's son, Richard, fully dressed with bloodstains on his arms and his hands. He seemed to show less concern about what had happened than his neighbors. Also noticed was that he took the time to push a steamer trunk out of his bedroom window with his personal belongings before jumping to safety. When the flames died down, officers began searching the charred remains of the house. Upon entering Adrian and Florence's bedroom, they found their bodies in their bed. Moving them, they found bloodstains underneath them on the unburned blanket. Due to the bloodstains on Richard, he was taken into custody by the undersheriff and by the detective. They returned to Saginaw about 3 the next morning, and under severe questioning at the Saginaw County Jail without a lawyer, he was asked about the bloodstains. He told them that he had cut his face leaping from his bedroom window, and he had fallen and bloodied his nose. Neighbors who had been interviewed told the deputies that Richard was wild and with an exceedingly quick temper. He had caused problems for them in the past, including he was charged with auto theft in 1920 in Ohio, where the story is that he bought a car and said that his father would pay for it. Well, his father didn't pay for it, so he was apprehended for grand theft auto. So then his father showed up and cleared everything up between the car dealer and the Michigan State Troopers, where they apprehended him. So this is the next day. This is the kind of headlines they had in the 1920s. Charred bodies of Mr. and Mrs. A.B. Champlain found on bloody blanket. Hemlock pair killed. House fired to hide crime is the belief.
I have a question.
Yes?
How does Frances do this?
Frances was disinherited when she married.
No, the daughter.
Yeah. Her and her husband, you're jumping.
Okay.
But her and her husband lived about a mile away on their farm.
Okay.
Yeah. Supposedly.
Okay.
Investigators went back to the home on Tuesday, on the next day, and they believe the fire was started in the bedroom. Chemicals that the firemen had used, they had not only used water, but they used some early fire suppressant, preserved the mattress. The bodies were covered in debris, and they pulled out of the mattress a watch and chain, and Adrian was laying on his back, and they realized that they had both been doused in kerosene. Yes. And they found 3 kerosene cans near the house. Both of the bodies were fully clothed, and as they said in the news article, overalls were clinging to the seared flesh, and the corset was still encircling the woman's waist. And their feet were still wearing fragments of shoes. William Oliver, one of the neighbors, who shared the same telephone line, said that the Champlain telephone call sounded incessantly from 6 to 8 that night with no response from anyone. And nobody had taken care of the animals the evening before. So they're calculating a time because there was no evening care for the livestock. Tuesday morning, an inquest was held at the Hemlock Town Hall by Dr. Werner Kirsten, who was the county coroner at the time. He came to the conclusion that Florence had a break in the back of her skull about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, the same size as the riveting hammer that was found in the ruins of the fire. Florence was not burned or suffocated. Adrian's face was crushed by the debris. They said, in their opinion, he had been killed with a blunt instrument, but they couldn't tell for sure. Richard maintains his innocence. The next day, head wound, cause of death, doctor testifies at inquest. Son maintains innocence of part in parent's death. That is Under Sheriff Hodges there, who, for show and tell for the news, brought the charred remains of the bed to show everyone. Isn't that delightful? Yeah. And also, it's sort of difficult with the quality of the photo, but that's the head of the hammer. The handle had been, here's the rounded end, and here's the flat end. Richard was bound over to circuit court and arraigned by Judge Clement, charged with first-degree murder of his stepmother and murder while attempting robbery. Champlain showed little emotion, and he asked about the attorney that he was promised but hadn't been seen since his arrest. In a different version, I focus on this because he was just appointed an attorney from the prosecutor's office. Yeah. Just saying. And Richard is quoted as saying, "I don't know anything about it. Somebody must have killed them, but I don't know how." Then, the next day, he's still in jail. His sister arrives. Frances comes to talk to him in the jail, and she says, "Richard, tell me the truth. It only makes it worse if you lie." Richard says, "If I did it, I would tell you." And the reason that there's quotes like this, local reporters were invited to watch the interrogation and the visitation of his sister sitting there in jail. Completely unkosher by today's. So she says, "Richard, I tell you now, I shall never believe this terrible thing of you unless you confess. They can send you any place and I'll never believe it." Later she says, "Richard is not like other boys fighting and quarreling. If he was wild, father and mother thought he was sowing his wild oats." So, His sister's there trying to pump him for information. His prosecution appointed lawyer waives examination, and he was bound over to court for a trial. And this is 3 days later. Then that afternoon, Clara is his girlfriend. She arrives at the jail. Richard is sobbing and threw his arms around her. "Do you know what you're accused of?" she says. And he says, "I'm not saying to you." She then urges him to tell the facts of the case, and Richard says, "Tomorrow's going to end all the trouble." Finally, he admits to her that he killed his parents when they were quarreling. Richard says, "They called you names, Clara." And Clara says, "That's what made you mad at your parents?" And he said, "Yes." "Is that what prompted you to kill them?" The undersheriff says. So the sheriff's there too. The lawyer is not there. And Richard says, "Yes, sir." Hodges says, "Did you kill them?" Richard says, "Yes." "How were they killed?" "I shot them with a .38 caliber revolver." "How about the kerosene?" "I did that." Champlain gradually tells Clara and the others the following. "When I got home that morning, my father was in the barn. He was talking about my being with a Catholic girl. All day we quarreled, and on the way to town, they went to pick up grain. When we went that afternoon to get grist, he called me down again. They started again at supper time. I went in the other room, got a gun that was there. They might have seen me going into the other room, but they didn't know what for. I shot Father first. Mother jumped and hollered, but everything was done so quickly. I shot them both through the heart. Blood and suffering mean nothing to me. I killed lots of men at the front. I'm a crack shot. I shot Father through the forehead and Mother directly through the heart." Hodge says, "What caused the break in her skull?" Richard says, "I don't know." So we have to remember what he went through when he was in World War I. And, I love that. I forgot that part. Boy slayer and sweetheart to whom he made confession. In front of reporters, and so now Richard tells his tale. 6 p.m., Richard claims to shoot Father, then Mother at the dinner table after arguing about Clara. His father, quote, says, "You're going to marry that damn Catholic girl." Richard walked into the next room, removed the .38 revolver from his father's dresser drawer, placed both his mother and father on the iron bed after he was finished. Then he drives to Saginaw, turns around, and comes back. "I went to town. I had to get away after I killed them. I couldn't do anything for a while. I went outside to see if anybody heard the shots." Yeah, on the farm. Like someone's going to even care if they heard a shot. At 7:30, he said that he poured kerosene over the bodies of his parents. He waited a couple hours to light the match because he didn't want to start the fire too early. He threw the trunk of his belongings out the second-story bedroom window. He then jumped out too. So he had some sort of a plan after the fact. Clara says, "Why did you do this terrible thing?" "Oh, Richard, why did you do it?" "I did it for you," Richard said. "I'm glad you owned up to it because it clears me." What gets me is that they said you killed them to get the $100,000 so you could marry me, because his father was a prosperous farmer. He had a large property. Richard then said, "You won't forget me, darling." And Clara says, "Forget you? If only I could." Prosecutor Crane, who's also there, but not his lawyer, says, "Why didn't you tell us before?" And then Richard says, "I wanted to tell her first. I feel better now. Clara claims Richard and she are only good friends and nothing more. He hinted at marriage, but I never took it seriously. Whatever. He was then arrested and charged with feloniously, willfully, and of his malice aforethought, did kill and murder Florence Champlain. Yes, ma'am.
Did the autopsy show gunshots? It just said that they were killed with blunt forces. What autopsy?
Well, no, there was the inquiry. So what they used to do in the old days is they'd go to the town hall, they'd set the bodies up, they'd get 5 or 6 responsible citizens to sit on the coroner's court, and they'd examine the bodies. So all they found in Florence was she had a hammer-sized part of her skull missing, and Dad's face was crushed. So if he did shoot his father in the head, but evidence, ma'am, we are talking about 1921. The man already has a lawyer who was suggested by the prosecutor's office. But wait, it all gets better. You think we're on the roller coaster now to Crazy Town? My goodness, we haven't even gone up the first big hill yet. Okay. Boy murderer goes to prison. Sweetheart refuses to go to station to bid Champlain farewell. So, the next day was his trial. Richard pleads guilty before Circuit Judge Clarence M. Brown. Judge Brown was personally known to, the judge was a personal friend of Adrian and Florence. He says, and he didn't recuse himself, and he says, Mr. Champlain, the court cannot express in adequate language the horror he has for the offense that you have committed. I knew your mother and father personally. I knew your father since I was a young boy and he was a young man. And he was a good man and a good citizen. And your stepmother was just as good a mother to you as your own mother would have been, and maybe more indulgent. It is too bad that in a case like this, the state of Michigan has not passed an act that would administer you what the court thinks this case should be administered. That is the death penalty. Personally, I feel an example should be made of you for that benefit of other young men who might be inclined to act as you have. It is the sentence of the court that you be and remain confined to the state's prison at Jackson at hard labor and solitary confinement for your natural life. Bam, bam. Day 5. Murder, sent to the big house, not even a week. But, it was Friday when they sentenced him. So, they had the weekend free. It was probably a lovely November weekend. Okay. So, what happens next is he's sent to Jackson, just like that. Now, I'm just putting this up here. It's too small to read, but this is part of sections of an interview that the warden had with Richard. At that time, the warden tried to interview everyone because they didn't have psychologists or psychiatrists. So he wanted to get a feeling for all he was actually a rather modern warden, except you'll find out later he's full of tricks himself. Okay, so Richard arrives in Jackson. He is questioned by Warden Harry Hubert of the Jackson State Prison. The warden tries to coerce Champlain into changing his story from that he and he hit his mother in the head with a hammer and shot my father. What he does is that what he does is he tells Richard that he's been dreaming about him. And he's been dreaming about the interview that they were going to have. And that in the dream, Richard told him what really happened with his mother and father through telepathy. But another clue from this is that he asked him his name, and he said, what is your birthday? And he said the 28th of August. But they're not sure because his mother died when he and his sister were very young, and the father never kept a history of how old they were, and all they know is what the neighbors told them. Oh, and then to get back to the PTSD, he was one of only 190 men out of 700 that were rescued in the Argonne forest. They were there trapped by the Germans for 6 days. Okay, now, the next one. It starts out, I don't want you to tell lies, says the warden. What difference is it going to make? No difference with you in this sentence if you tell the truth. But tell it as it is, the truth, because your future life is before you. I dreamed about you last night. Okay. See, we're going up the hill on the roller coaster right now. And Richard says, you probably did, but I'm telling you the truth. The warden says, I dreamt how you killed your folks. I knew you were coming because I saw it in the paper. I did not have any sleep the night before. He'd been at a long party in Detroit, which you'll find out probably what it was all about later. Now you can only imagine I was pretty tired going without sleep for 48 hours, and then I picked up the paper in Detroit yesterday. I saw that you had confessed and that you were coming here. You have done something that you have a faint memory of, and you're not sure enough to classify it as part of the crime, so you're not telling it the way of the shooting the father and mother, when in your own soul you know that isn't the exact way, but it is near as you can remember. And he says, you were bothering me with mental telepathy, and here I was going to sleep dreaming about you coming, and we were working together, and you told me the truth last night, and you have not fixed it up this morning. And Richard says, I have told you the truth. So then, all this information comes out that the warden knows, but wasn't brought up during the trial, because of course, it wasn't really a trial. About 3 years after his real mother died, Adrian married a Protestant. Now, she naturally brought the children up Protestants, and the father never interfered with the mother. Like mother, like sister. And when his sister married a Catholic, that was why she was disinherited. The stepmother tells to the father that the children are wrong, and the father forgets the good old days when he loved the Catholic girl who bore his children, and why he did not remember this mother and allow the children to be Catholics. But after the Protestant marriage, this has changed. And this is all from the warden. The last thing he says is, now this boy becomes acquainted with a Catholic girl after having other sweethearts, and his desire is to marry the girl. And he flips out. Any questions? So the father didn't care enough to remember the children's birthdays. The neighbors told them what their birthdays were. I think Florence was not a good and indulgent mother. Okay, so this is the warden. He was Michigan State Prison warden from 1918 to 1925. Now, this is where it gets good. We're going up the next mountain. Besides running fraudulent construction contracts during the construction of the new prison, he supplied cheap concrete and inmate labor for Governor Grossbeck's signature road building projects to undercut the contractor's bids. He appointed William Hopp as the prison chaplain. Now, you all are familiar with the name Grossbeck. It's a large road in the Detroit area. William Hopp, as the prison chaplain, could influence inmate paroles at the time to a large extent. He would pressure inmates' wives to have sex with guards as well as work in his Detroit brothel to try and buy their freedom. He also, not the warden, but the chaplain, he also ran the drug trade at the prison. One inmate testified that his wife would send $75, which was a lot of money in 1921, which today is the equivalent of $1,235 per month to Hopp in exchange for a monthly supply of morphine. Oh, this case is a gift that keeps on giving. I don't know what's going on in this case, to be honest with you. Then finally, a week later, Adrian and Florence are buried. You have to remember, though, 5,000 attended the service. There were only like 1,500 people in Hemlock at that time. So people came from everywhere because it was so sensational. And then that day also, the warden wants to have a physical examination of Richard, because there were several inmates that had come in the last year or two that he was there, that they found out when they took him to the U of M hospital that they'd had brain damage, and so some of them were actually able to fix them at the time. Oh, Sylvia, what time is it? Really? Okay. So, during this time also, one of my other questions is, did Richard kill his parents, or did his sister? She only lived a mile away. Was he covering for her? Because he was trying to help her out when he was in the Army and when he was doing jobs during the winter. And his parents would never send her, after the disinheriting, they wouldn't send her gifts that he'd sent her or anything like that. So maybe he thought his life was screwed, so he might as well save his sister. That's one of my theories. But what comes up and plays out basically over the next 6 months is who inherits the farm. Does Frances, who's the daughter of Adrian, or is it Florence's heirs in Minneapolis, where she was from? So this goes on for quite a while. Finally, in January of 1922, the Farmers Mutual Insurance Company doesn't know who to give the money to, because it depends who died first. And they can't decide, the coroner couldn't figure out if Adrian died first or if Florence died first. Because if Adrian died first, Florence was the heir. And if she died first, then it was Adrian. So, oops, sorry. So Richard was finally summoned back to Saginaw, and they're like, the insurance people, lawyers, and they're going, who'd you kill first? This is the only way we can figure this out. And he said he didn't know. He'd been so confused by everything. So finally, in May, the Florence's daughter from Minneapolis and Frances, Adrian's daughter, they shook hands and split the estate. But that was like the last major hoop-de-doo with everything going on. Let's see, what's next? So, this is only day 11 since the murder. Page 1, all these stories were on page 1 for a week. But by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, page 1, the banner headline was that Saginaw High beat Arthur Hill 10-0. And the last interview with Clara was on page 5. Because it's what happens with murders and that, they slip through the newspaper over time. This is his first prisoner card at Jackson. So you can see that there's all these different things. It talks about his relatives in Michigan. Parents born where? Mother, dead. Father, New York, dead. He is single. Let's see. They talk about his points of identification. Let's see. Does he drink? No. Does he smoke? Yes. Does he chew? No. Does he do dope? No. Does he have a venereal disease? No. Does he have any minor children? No. The reason that up here, these are what they used as measurements to try and identify criminals before there were photographs. So we're in a time period where this is shifting through. That's his original one. And this is the later one when he is in 1950, I believe. He escapes twice. Once in 1938, he escaped with another prisoner, Earl, and they'd been assigned to hospital duty, so it was easy to get out of the prison. And the trustee prisoner drove them through the prison gates, and the prisoners held a razor to his neck and pushed him out of the car. They were found drunk in a drunk tank in the Wyandotte County Jail. They couldn't even do an escape right. They just went, had some money, got drunk, got caught for a DUI. But the best part is that he wasn't arrested because he was drunk. A security guard saw him fall into the river because he was so drunk. And then he wasn't identified for later that day. And then he was always honest. Richard, he said, "Did you escape?" And he said, "Yeah." So it was also the first drink he'd ever had in his life when he escaped. Yep. And he OD'd on his epilepsy medicine. So there's another. Yep. So he's quoted as saying, when I left the prison, I had $15 I had saved from making and selling rings to the inmates. We went to get to a beer garden. Earl bought some beers. I passed out. When I came to, Earl had gone, and so was his $12. So then again, in 1948, he's trying to get his records, because what happened in the late 1940s, 1950s, the state of Michigan lawmakers realized that the system of justice was a mess for about, 50 years. So these changed laws about parole and giving inmates second hearings who could prove that they had a bad trial or no representation, as he did. So he was transferred to Marquette, where he died December 21st, 1956. So this is his death record card from the Marquette prison. And for some reason, stamping dead one time wasn't enough. They just kept stamping dead across the top. So, these are my questions about all of this. First of all, as I already mentioned, his conviction took less than a week. He didn't have a public defender. They didn't have them yet. He didn't even have a lawyer who wasn't affiliated in some way with the prosecutor's office. The coroner's inquest came out and said that both Adrian and Florence were killed with a hammer. That's not what Richard said.
No, it said that only one was going to be killed with a hammer.
Yep. Well, see, that's part of it, that since we got the whole court record, we could pull things. Yeah. So they don't really know how they died. Did he kill his parents because he thought that was they just made him so mad he flipped his lid and shot him that night because he didn't want to marry a Catholic? Richard had already seen what happened to his sister. She was completely disinherited and basically thrown out in the snow one night. She had to go live with her fiance's parents for a while. And Richard also wanted what he believed was his, which was the farm. Did he kill his parents? Oh, someone have a question? No. My other question is, did he kill his parents for his sister? A coat previously had been delivered to his house that he wanted to give to his sister. His parents wouldn't allow it. He was fond of his sister, and did he kill his parents hoping he could give her some or all of the family inheritance? Was he protecting her? And I know things are different right now, but Florence must have been a complete bigot to have that kind of hate for Catholics. And what's weird is that they were members of a church even then wasn't really completely anti-papist. They were Methodist. So it's just all this stuff going together. And what kind of home life did this guy have? You know? I don't know. Personally, I think today he would have gotten off, or he just would have did some time. I don't know. So it all goes back to that.
Investigation today would have been totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned he was epileptic. Was the epilepsy growing on, or was that something that happened that
We couldn't figure it out. That was the only thing that popped up, was that he had been taking epilepsy medicine. And we also never found out where he was buried. We don't know if he's buried in Marquette. We don't know if he was buried at Jackson. We couldn't even really find his death certificate. So. No. No. Yeah, no, just sort of a lost soul. I do have family stories, though, about what it's like being Catholic in a Protestant area. So I know from family history that it's not always the easiest thing. But, what did Florence have on Dad? I mean, my God. I mean, she wasn't a looker. Yeah, and also what they found, what we also didn't add, is that it was sort of like a correspondence marriage. It was sort of like a Lonely Hearts Club kind of thing that he met her. And then he just let her just take over the house and screw with his children. From what we can tell, because it was tough finding that too, we couldn't really find any solid information. We think they were in the 4 or 5 range. Yeah.
Possible that she turned their birth certificates or the baptismal certificates if they were born Catholic.
No. Yep. Yep.
Through all your investigation, there's no relatives to talk to?
Nope.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Just neighbors?
Yep, just the neighbors at the time. Well, he was actually Adrian was from New York originally. So it's just, so it's just a weird thing, but I mean, just him being in that meat grinder in World War I, barely escaping that, and then to come home and just, be berated because of who he was dating. And then seeing his sister who just said, I'm going to marry this guy, I don't care. And
But it's like if he actually did commit those murders, why come up with a different scenario of how they were killed?
Mhm.
That doesn't make sense.
But that's a hallmark of PTSD.
Oh,
He could have blacked out. He could have blacked out too. Or he could have went into could have had a flashback. But they never talk about finding the 38 either. It's just a mess.
Where was the location of the farm out in Hemlock? Is there any records of that? It has to be in tax rolls, I guess.
We didn't go that deep. The plat maps that we have access to that still exist, we can't figure it out. It's somewhere on 46 outside of Hemlock, one way or the other. Yeah. So, yes, ma'am.
Whatever happened with Francis? Did she have a family?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Her and her husband went on and had like a regular life. And, yeah. Mm-hmm. So did Clara. Clara got married later on to a guy that's not a murderer. Yeah. Everyone went on. He just rotted in prison. Escaped a couple of times. Tried to get himself extricated later on, but it didn't work either. Yeah. Anybody else?
Other thoughts?
No information on how they got to Wynot. Jackson person.
Well, they stole the car.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
why they pick Wynot?
My guess is either that was where Earl was from, or it was the first bar they came across. And the first thing Earl wanted was, he just wanted a couple of beers after being in prison for, bars don't have cash bars in them. or jails.
All right. Okay. So I guess we don't get to know. We don't get to know with certainty what happened. That's the way of it. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing this interesting conundrum of a case. Yeah.
Thank you for listening.